I'm Jane Hansen. This week in the arena, we're tackling some of the topics and current events that has everyone talking about now as we celebrate Mother's Day, the beatification of Pope John Paul II in Rome, and the public reaction to the successful U.S. covert operation and assassination of wanted terrorist #1 Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. Joining us now is Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and our in-studio guest, Robert Bobby Muniz, President of Code Blue Building Consultants, a 9/11 hero who was working construction near Ground Zero on September 11, 2001. Plus, our regular contributor, Grant Gallicho, Associate Editor of Commonweal magazine. Thank you all for being here. Bobby, let's start with you.
Sure.
This killing of Osama bin Laden must have struck very close to home because you actually witnessed what happened on September 11th.
Well, when I heard about it, that had occurred, as far as my feelings and reaction, I was actually very content and very happy that happened. Finally, they got a terrorist out there that was the #1 most wanted, and I had a feeling that they end up a lot of family with closure. Mm-hmm. And so as myself.
Well, so you, because you're there, but for maybe a few steps or a few something, you could have easily been one of the victims.
Yes, as a matter of fact, when that occurred, when I was down there, I was working at the Federal Reserve Building, mm-hmm. and we're doing renovation. I think the top, 5 floors, and when the first plane hit, I went over there, but also I used to go inside that building like 6 o'clock in the morning because we had another crew on the North Tower. I'm sure that it was on the 76th story, mm-hmm. I think more or less where the plane had hit. And me coming in late, actually I would have been one of them.
Another one of those stories that if by chance...
Right.
How much do you think God played in keeping you safe that day?
Well, instead of making a right, I made a left. More so to speak in that sense. Uh-huh. But the whole communication had went down. I tried to get them on the cell phone. At that time, we had the Nextel with 2-way radios. There were like local 3 electricians and also 157 union workers. They were out there, and I think they were one of the first that got killed.
Were they really? So this is part of your crew?
Right, it is. I was a union worker on and off for about 30 years.
So you're physically okay?
So far, I get monitored every 2 years by Mount Sinai. That was like a mandatory, mm-hmm. for what happened in Ground Zero. And so far, they see nothing wrong. Thank God for that.
I was down at Ground Zero the day after Osama bin Laden had been killed, and there was this real sense of elation and of celebration. But I found that inside of me, having been a journalist on the scene back then, almost 10 years ago, I felt like all these, the reawakening of those feelings of horror and loss and sorrow and fear. It's as if all of a sudden something I'd put a cap on just opened up again.
Actually, when I was in there, they couldn't get me out of Ground Zero. And I stood there and I seen things that I would not wish anybody to see. People jumping off the World Trade Center. Willingly, they would hold their hand, they would just jump off. And I think it was one part that I seen Father Michael Judge, mm-hmm. When the body just came down and actually caused his death. The jet fuel went down the elevator shaft and just actually blew the lobby up in one part. It was devastating.
One of the things I know you were a hero that day, that you saved people's lives, that you carried them to safety.
I actually, when the building was coming down, and because at that point nobody knew that the building was actually going to come down. Mm-hmm. The firefighters, police officers, nobody. So when the roar started taking place, and you just hear a big roar, nobody knew. I mean, it was really loud, like if there was a turbine engine right next to you. But you don't know what's going on. And then when the building started coming down and all the pieces of that building was going everywhere, everybody ran for panic. Out of panic, they just ran. And there was actually people falling down in the street, and I ran over there, picked them up, and put them for the next doorway, and tried to get them out of there, because usually what I do with construction and safety and protection, make sure that nobody gets hurt. And that's actually, it was unbelievable. I've seen people getting stepped on as they were running. I mean, not that they're meaning to do that, but when it comes to a sense of panic, people just running their life, they don't see anything else.
Monsignor, I know that, I just want to say first that
Sure.
Bobby then went down and worked for 11 months helping clean up the construction site, or help clean up the devastation. And Monsignor, you were there because you were physically at the morgue area with anointing the dead.
It was a time where a lot of priests throughout our diocese, throughout the city, would be all over, making sure that they were tending to the spiritual, to the emotional needs of the people who were the rescue workers. My responsibility was to go to anoint the body parts as they came to the morgue, and it was a very, very emotional, very, very emotional experience. A lot of priests would go with the families of victims as the fire department would take them to Ground Zero, and journey with them as they would go through. So, you know, you're right in saying that this was not just a single day event, right? It went for months, and if you remember in the city, there was a hush that fell over the entire city from about September to December, where you would never even hear the beeping of a horn.
Right, that's
true.
true.
It was a moment where there was just this deep reflection that was taking place in the city.
And profound sadness.
Yeah.
I guess the question then, I referred earlier to the elation I saw right after Osama bin Laden had been killed. Is it, I mean, when you're there every day, you want to be shaking your fist at that guy,
Right.
and you're watching the terrible wounds. Is it okay to feel good about somebody being killed?
Well, remember when President Bush went down to Ground Zero, shortly right after that Friday before, and he said, you know, I hear you, and soon our enemies will hear you soon. Right? That was a big turning moment in his presidency. And you know, for the 8 years that he was president, we really pursued Osama bin Laden and were not successful. And I really think that what President Obama has done, and the celebration, I think, really is really due to President Obama, that he was an extraordinarily patient man. Prosecuted this war on terror in a way that is very similar to President Bush. But what I think is striking is that he sent a SEAL team in. Right, he could have just bombed the compound, but he took the extraordinary action, a real courageous decision, to send a SEAL team in and to kill Osama bin Laden and extract his body. I thought it was really remarkable.
But I want to get back to the point, and Grant, please feel free to interject it because we only have a minute or two left. But I just is it okay to celebrate this death? It seems so contrary to who and what we are.
I found it strange. I got the text messages as I was coming home from dinner with my wife, and I hadn't thought about him in so long. He hadn't been in the news. I didn't know whether he was alive. I don't think a lot of people knew. Obviously, we didn't even know when we went in. But I felt a strange sense of separation from the joyous, you know, the partying and the chanting. I mean, I think it's okay to say it is good that he is dead because he no longer poses a threat to more innocent people. But I think as a Catholic, there's something that troubles me about celebrating someone's death.
I don't think it was being so much of a celebration as this was a catharsis. I mean, and I think that is a difference. Certainly, no one wants to celebrate, and the Vatican statement was very clear, right? The Vatican's press secretary, Federico Lombardi, said, we don't celebrate death, but at the same time, we recognize this man was responsible for the spreading of hatred and division. And so now he stands before his Maker, and as Christians, we pray for him.
Yeah.
Well, my opinion is that as far as bin Laden, I think a lot of family has closure throughout this event.
Yeah.
And I don't wish nobody dead, you know, as a Christian myself, you know, and celebration is closure and families, and they caught, so to speak, the bad guy.
Yeah.
I am more content than anything. What's going to come out of it, as far as Obama, what he did in 3 years, what other president could do in 7, you know, I really feel that he should get reelected. I swear to God, I think this guy did a great job.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you for sharing your story.
Of
Thank
course.
you for your heroic action on that day.
You're quite
And
welcome.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So much
Thank
pleasure.
you.
We're going to take a break for just a moment, but we want to invite you to weigh in on our discussion anytime by going to our website at netny.net and click on Enter the Arena. We welcome your questions and comments, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, as we continue our discussion on current topics. Joining us now are regular contributor Elizabeth Scalia, managing editor of the Catholic Portal at pathos.com, and she just came back from Rome and the Beatification ceremony for Pope John Paul II. And then our special in-studio guest, Stefanie Gutierrez, news reporter with the tablet and mother with an inspiring story of faith whose 3-year-old daughter has Rett syndrome. To both of you, happy Mother's Day.
And you too.
You too.
And thank you. Mother's Day is a bittersweet day to you because your youngest child was diagnosed last year right around this time with a debilitating neurological disease.
Yeah, it's called Rett syndrome. It's been a tough year, a lot of dark moments, but a lot of positive moments as well.
Well, tell us about your journey in faith, because there's got to be a point when you get mad at God or whomever.
I think anybody
this.
that you ask, family, friends would say, if you would ask them how it's Steph been this year, it's she's angry. She's angry and she has a lot of questions, but she's getting there. There have been many times where I didn't want to go to Mass on Sunday, but I have a little boy, Gabriel, he'll be 6 in June, that it was, no, I need to go to Mass. He needs to see us as a family going on Sundays, and he needs to understand the faith separately from my understanding of it. And I remember one of the most poignant moments of my year, from Mother's Day 2010 to this year, was sitting in Mass, rolling my eyes through the entire homily and the Gospel and thinking, oh, why am I even here? And it was the Feast of St. Anthony, and the priest at the close of the Mass, I was ready to run out. The priest at the end of the Mass said, let's remember to say a prayer for people who have lost their faith, that they might find it again. And let's also say a prayer for people that have lost their joy. And it was a moment of welcome surprise, because up until that point, I thought I lost my faith. I didn't think that I believed anymore, that God could do this to a child or to me. I was very selfish about it. And when he said that it was a turning moment, that I haven't lost my faith, it's my joy that I've lost, and that's what I have to pray to get back.
Well, your daughter has Rett syndrome. Basically, it's a very severe form of autism. There is no known cure for it. Have you then, I know as a reporter, you put on that hat too to write about it. So how do you take the kind of practicality of it and the emotion of it and marry them in a way that makes you survive?
Well, I remember telling my husband, if one more person tells me that without suffering we wouldn't know compassion, I'm going to kill them.
Oh!
and it was, and he laughed because he could understand. But it's funny how God works, because no matter how angry we are at him, and no matter how, like, the meanest things that we say to him, he loves us through it all. And Jesus loves me no matter what, no matter how I feel towards him that day, because it wasn't, it's not ultimately, he doesn't point her out and say, I'm going to make her life hard. It's that Anna, in many ways, is a tool for all of us to learn of God's grace. There are days when I'm, covered in throw up and I'm changing my 6:30 diaper, and we're having a hard time eating that day. She's fed through a feeding tube, and it's like, oh, this is my life, but at the same turn, she has brought so many people closer to Christ, I think, through her suffering, myself included, knowing that there is tremendous grace that we're having. A priest told me once, as long as Anna lives in your house, Christ lives in your house, because Anna's without sin. And I think that really does help get me through the hardest days, that there is a purpose to all of this, that there is something great, somebody has a greater hand in it. I remember going to adoration right after it happened, and I looked right at that monstrance with just fury, and I said, why did you do this to me? Why did you do this to me? And very quickly, very swiftly, I heard it on my heart. It was like, I didn't do this to you, I did this for you. And I know that Anna holds the key to a lot of our salvations.
I know that, Monsignor, you've spent some time talking with Stefanie. And what on earth do you say to people when they have that initial anger to help them through it?
Well, I don't know if you say anything that really helps somebody through it. One of the things that really impresses me about Steph is Steph came here. She has no family here, right? She doesn't have a support system. Think about how hard it is to have a child with special needs, but then not to have a support system. And the strain that puts on your marriage. And you're a young couple, right? You're a newly married couple. Think about how difficult a new marriage is. And 2 small children, one with special needs, and really how she just manages to kind of walk through it all. And I think that's what impresses me most about Stefanie.
I think I do want to say that, while they're not here physically, we have phone calls to our parents on a daily basis. We have the hard, nitty-gritty spiritual conversations of what it means to have Anna in our lives, and they're good shepherds, but it is hard on a day-to-day basis. Just
How did it work with you and Manny? I mean, sometimes in a marriage with a child with special needs, it can put a real strain.
Thankfully, I have an amazing husband. He's so great. And one thing that we always said was, not to be narcissistic, but it was, something like this either makes or breaks a marriage. And and really, I think it has brought us closer than we ever thought that we would be. More love for him that I have now than I did on the day that we got married.
Wow. I know that you also there's something about Pope John Paul II and a prayer of his.
Really... as we kind of, go into the whole Mother's Day thing was, one thing the Blessed John Paul II said, and when he wrote in his letter to women, was he didn't just credit, the great and famous women and the extraordinary doctors of the church, but he credited the ordinary women that were using, the gifts of their womanhood to suffer with and to help, people less fortunate or to give selflessly over and over. And that is the definition of a mom. And one thing that I love about JP2 is that he kind of, anytime that I've interviewed a priest and I've asked them, what inspired you, with your vocation, 9 times out of 10 they'll tell me it was either a grandmother or a mother. And we, in our femininity, have an amazing gift if we use it the way that God intended it to.
Yeah. So let's segue right to Elizabeth and her experience at the beatification of Pope John Paul II.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what kept going through my mind when you were talking was John Paul constantly told us, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid when we're facing challenges like this. And I mean, we all do. Nobody escapes life without, some trauma somewhere. I think if you can look at it and kind of remember that, don't be afraid. There's always a plan. There's a grace, and there's something in store for you in the middle of it. That's a wonderful thing, and it just seems so suited to you
really
because you're
does,
such
right?
a fan of John Paul.
Yeah.
So tell us what it was like in Rome.
100. 1.5 million people is way too many people. It was great. I can't say it was anything but great. It was crowded. People of faith from all over the world. They were handing out these newspapers, and people were. I had a really interesting experience with this because I got to the loggia really, really early. It was damp and it was wet, and some people were taking this and they were sitting on it because they didn't want to sit on the dampness. And then the sun came out and they put it on their head to block the sun. And
so it was quite the tool.
It was like John Paul was just helping them through everything that day. And somebody, a friend of mine, took a picture of one of these in the gutter afterwards and said she loved it because to her, she was thinking of how people were using these newspapers all day long. Some people had slept overnight in the street, and they had used them for shelter or to curl up with. So she said, really, it's like, John Paul, it was the all-purpose John Paul. So it was great. It was long. The moment of the beatification was fantastic because I was in a loggia right across from the press, and I was able to look down, and I got some pictures to be shown with this. But I was able to look down on all of it and then look up and watch that unveiling of the portrait. And at that moment, I was surrounded by people of, Italian people and Polish people and French people. I think I was the only English speaker there. And the Italians were very pleased with the portrait, and there was just kind of a sigh. And they were like, bene, va bene, they approved of that. But I wanted to see what the Poles would do, and the Poles were utterly silent. They said nothing at all. They were in a state of such reverent awe that all they did was just the tears coming down their face and staring at it and sighing, just this, and I thought, wow, these people have been through so much. Their history has been such a difficult history, and this is a moment of almost like grandfather is there for them.
And of course, if we think about John Paul II and the things that happened while he was Pope, the Berlin Wall coming down, the fall of communism, something that the Polish people and all of Eastern Europe was so deeply affected by. I mean, to them, he truly has been a saint.
And I think it has had an enormous impact on the staying power of their faith. While I was in Rome, I read something like 1 in 8 Poles was in Rome for this beatification.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an enormous amount. There were over 100,000 Poles. And there was one day I was in Jesu Church, which is the first Jesuit church built in Rome. Beautiful church, and there was a harp concert going on, and I went in for that. And all the Poles were there, and they were making their rounds from chapel to chapel. And I ended up not paying any attention at all to the harp because I was so busy watching them in this astonishing piety that was so humble and so unself-conscious. I mean, they were before a crucifix, they'd get down, their foreheads on the floor. In America, we don't do that. We're very self-conscious. We don't want anybody to think that we're overdoing it. But it was so sincere.
Well, keep all the rest of your thoughts because we're going to take a break. Stefanie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you
We
for
really
having
appreciate
me.
it. Happy Mother's Day again.
Thank you, you too.
And keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have met you.
You as well.
We will be right back. We'll continue our discussion with some final thoughts. Welcome back to Into the Arena. Continuing our conversation now, let's talk a little bit more about the beatification of John Paul II. You know, there are some people who say this has been a rush job. It's way too soon. He's only been dead since 2005. Do you think that that's appropriate?
I don't. I think that the prerequisites to be beatified had been met, and so, as Navarro Val said, why wait? And I think it actually is kind of a fitting, I think it's actually a fitting tribute to the man who, more than half the saints in the Catholic Church today have been canonized by Pope John Paul II. And
Really?
when you think about the history of the Church, he has canonized almost half the saints. And what I think he has done is he's really sent a signal to say that sainthood is not something that is inaccessible, but rather is the vocation of every single Christian. And I think that by beatifying this man in the lifetime of so many people who have known him, is something which gives us all something hope to. Because you know what we know is, we know he's obviously a man who had failings. He had flaws, right? I mean, you take a look at the history of the Church, we take a look at the most recent tragic history of the Church, and he was Pope during this time, and so we know he failed in ways, right? But that doesn't mean he's not a saint. And
Well,
that's
no,
what's
I don't-
accessible or beatified. That's what makes it accessible for you and for me, because here's the thing, Kieran Harrington fails. He makes mistakes, he gets things wrong, but that doesn't mean he can't be a saint. And that's why I think the beatification of Pope John Paul is so important for me. So I don't think it's too early.
You, Grant?
I have mixed thoughts about it. I mean, on the one hand, why not? On the other hand, there's something a little strange about the papalization of the Church, I find a little bit. There are only about a third of popes have been canonized. And it's true that our current Pope did suspend the regular 5-year waiting period to begin the process. And in part, he was under an enormous amount of pressure, I'm sure. I mean, John Paul had a very strong following. He was a very powerful figure in terms of personality and administration. But I think that when you're talking about a pope, it's very difficult to separate personal holiness from administration.
Right.
And that's why I tend to think that we probably should have waited to see how the administrative role is going to work itself out, because it still is.
Right. Right. I mean, there are so many concerns from people who have been involved in the sex abuse scandal who are look upon it in, you know, with
I think
horror.
it's actually a real important reason to make that distinction, because we are not what our work is. I am so much more than what my work is. Certainly,
That's a
I am
good
a
point.
priest,
That's a good
but I am
point.
not my work. And the Pope is a priest. So I think it is important that one's work should not be the dictum of whether or not one is a saint or not. It is personal holiness is so much more than that.
You know, I think being in Rome, I saw so many young people. I was astonished at how many young people there were. And I think, I'm not saying that he was canonized because we needed the shot in the arm, but I think it has been a very good shot in the arm in the sense that we've had nothing but this steady drip, drip, drip of negative stories and disheartening stories, and it's been exhausting on some levels. And at least the beatification coming when it has, again, I don't think it's happening now. It happened now because of anybody's idea of timing, but I think it's been a very helpful thing. Just to kind of get people to think, yes, in the midst of everything that's difficult, you know, we can still rise to challenges and we still have heroes. And I think it's really important to know we still have heroes.
I was surprised to read somewhere about the number of young people who have either become Catholics or returned to the church because of all of his youth. You know, the
World Youth Days.
World Youth Days, yeah. So,
And they've been a potent force for vocations too.
Well, what he did was, what I think Pope John Paul was able to do is he took the message directly to the people, right? So in the past, the message was communicated through bishops and priests. What he was able to do through the use of media, because of his own personality, because of his own experience as an actor, was able to bring the message directly to the people.
Well, he was also really charismatic, and he had a way of challenging the youth that they weren't being challenged, to be countercultural Christians in the way that he challenged them.
final thought from you, Grant?
Well, I think the World Youth Day angle is interesting. You can count the people who are there, but you can't count the young people who aren't there. And I think that there's a bit of a sampling error when you focus on that aspect of John Paul's papacy.
And you get the last word of all.
Well, I mean, I think that Pope John Paul, I was a young priest when he was the priest who, Bishop Pope when I was named a priest, he was the Pope when I was mostly a child. He made a profound impact on the life of the church, and an impact that I'm very grateful for.
Well, thank you. And thank you guys very much for being here again. And thank you for watching. You can always see us online at netny.net. For all of us here, I'm Jane Hanson. We'll see you next time in the arena.